Let's pray together. Let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I know that in my life I am very blessed. Blessed to be in my 30s and yet be able to own a home. For my wife and I to both have jobs, for us to have good insurance. That's a blessing that we have that yet so many around us do not have. It's a blessing that we grew up in homes that taught us the importance of giving and of saving and of investing. And that's something that not everyone has. And so I have to recognize these blessings because, and we should recognize these blessings in our lives because there are so many in our community who do not have that. And that's part of why we are doing this biblical stewardship campaign, is so that we can look at practical ways from the Bible to guide us in how we can view and use and understand money, because, and I've said this every week so we can remember it, most of our understanding of money comes from when, where, and by whom we were born. And not a single one of us could control that. That was all by chance. And over the past several weeks, we've been learning about some biblical practices to help us better understand how to be good stewards. And we keep using this word steward in stewardship, but we never stopped to really look at it. Do we know what it means to be a steward? We don't have stewards in society today, do we? Or none of us are wealthy enough to have a steward, really, right? It's a caretaker, right? Someone who can take care of your affairs and of your things. And so we need to be good stewards. We need to be good caretakers of all the things that God has blessed us with. And it's not just the material, it's our calling, it's our relationships, it's our existence. And so we've been looking at this over the past several weeks, and we've discussed tithing, that word that so many would rather not talk about. And that is giving the first 10% of everything back to God. Of all you have and all you are, back to God. And then last week we talked about investing, making sure that we're making right and just choices with where and how we invest our money, time, and talents. So far, we're working toward giving away 10%, toward investing 10%. And now today, we're going to talk about saving. And a good place to start to work toward a good habit of saving would also be 10%. I was doing a home visit recently where I was talking to the person about our stewardship campaign because they can't come to church. And they asked me about how we can talk about saving in a scriptural way. Because after all, the most well-known verse that could relate to saving is when Jesus says, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal." Right? We've heard that, right? But do we remember what the next verse is in Matthew 6? Matthew 6:20. Do we know the next verse? There we go. It says, But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. So then, saving is important, but is it only important for the afterlife? I don't think so. Because what is saving? Is it just an account? It's security. Several weeks ago, I showed you this slide of, I think we put it in the presentation so we can see it again, called Cash Poor. And on this slide, we see that more than 40% of people in our country are unable to cover a $400 emergency expense. Now we see that that number is going down, which is good, but that's still a very large number. Over 40% of people, less than 60% of people are able to cover that expense, and 40% cannot. We are not a secure people. And the practice of saving gives us peace of mind, stability for today, and security for a future where we can make sure there are resources for our ministry. Again, I recognize that I am blessed in my life that when we woke up on one Saturday morning and our refrigerator was dead, we had the savings and ability to be able to replace it because of us practicing saving. But not everybody is able to do that. And we need to look out for one another and help one another so that we can be secure. Our scripture readings this morning show us the importance of saving. Kind of weird, right? Because they're called the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. But they show us the importance of saving in a way that gives us a glimpse into God's understanding of saving. The series of stories we heard are all aimed at a certain people. Luke 15 begins, all the tax collectors and sinners were gathered around Jesus to listen to him. The Pharisees and legal experts were grumbling, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. So who's around Jesus? It's the tax collectors and the sinners, right? But then it's also the Pharisees and the legal experts. And it's when they start grumbling that Jesus turns and says to them. I think these are directed towards the Pharisees and legal experts in the company of the sinners and tax collectors. It's directed towards those people that think that they are worthy and secure in the company of those people that are labeled as unworthy and insecure. He is speaking to the people who are in charge, the people who have the means to be secure. And then he tells them some stories that actually seem pretty wasteful. First, two short ones. And he says to these wealthy leaders in front of those who have great need, he says, "Suppose someone among you had 100 sheep and lost one of them. Wouldn't he leave the other 99 in the pasture and search for the lost one until he finds it?" And I can imagine the people that are hearing this, I can see the Pharisees and the legal experts thinking, this is ridiculous. No, we would not leave 99 in search of one. And I can see the tax collectors and the sinners thinking, I'd never have 99. I would long for one. And when he finds it, he is thrilled and places it on his shoulders. When he arrives home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Celebrate with me, because I found my lost sheep." And of course, the Pharisees and legal experts, the people of means, think that this is ridiculous. No one would leave 99 for the one. And no one would broadcast that stupidity to their family and friends. But those without, they are the one. And they, of course, would leave what little they have to find the one. And he continues, "Or what woman, if she owns 10 silver coins and loses one of them, wouldn't light a lamp and sweep the house, searching her home carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Celebrate with me, because I found my lost coin.'" No. Of course, we wouldn't spend more in a celebration than what we just found. The Pharisees and legal experts see how wasteful these celebrations are. I think we see that God's understanding of saving is different than ours. The idea isn't to store up for the sake of storing up, for the sake of people seeing how wealthy you are, but to be secure enough to be able to step out and help when needed. We need the security of our salvation so that we can celebrate savings in others too. These stories aren't just about money. It's not just about the material. As we've been learning through stewardship, it's not just about the material. It's about relationships. It's about life. So we heard about the lost sheep and the lost coin, and then Jesus tells us a very familiar story about the lost son, which we mainly hear, and in most Bibles it's labeled as what? The what son? Prodigal. Where else in life do we ever use that word? Why do we do this in church, right? Prodigal means wasteful. And this clearly alludes to the wasteful nature of the son's spending. See, the son leaves his connection to family and God and wastes his inheritance on a life that leads him even further away. He's wasteful in his relationship with his father when he says, "I wish you were dead, give me what is mine now." And he's wasteful in that inheritance and how he spends it. But he might not be the only prodigal person in this text. Because maybe it's the father who is prodigal. So the father is wasteful. He leaves behind his dignity, his honor, and his right to exact punishment. The father runs to one son, and he begs another. He is shameful in how he accepts his son who has disgraced him, even going so far as to run, which is a most undignified act, to welcome him home. The blog A Different Heresy writes about this, and they write, "This may not seem like much to us, but a man who ran like this in Jesus' time would have been bringing shame on himself. It was below his station, and more than that, in the act of running, he would have exposed his legs in a way which would have been considered indecent. I am reminded at this moment in the story of when a king danced with such joy and enthusiasm that his robes also flew up inappropriately. The father risks bringing shame on himself in order to greet the son. This is the depth of his love. He is willing to shame himself and expose his legs even before the son has offered his confession." There's waste aplenty in this story. But God is wasteful in ways that the divine continues to reach out to us again and again. Even when we aren't secure, God reaches out and calls for us. Even when we aren't just and ethical and right in our investments, God reaches out and calls for us. Even when we don't tithe or give back, God reaches out using resources to call for us. Even when we reject that call, God reaches out and is wasteful in reaching again and again. God doesn't give up on us, and so we should learn that no one is lost forever. If it's not about the prodigal, we might ask about who is lost in this story. Brian McLaren, in his book, Why Did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad Cross the Road, writes, it's a good title of a book, isn't it? As we tell it, the story climaxes when a runaway boy returns home feeling disgraced, hoping to re-enter the household as a slave, and the father graciously receives him as a son. But the real climax, I propose, comes later, when the father slips out of the welcome home party to speak with the alienated older brother outside. The primary message is addressed to the hostile older brothers who feel right and superior and offended, who won't join the party by joining God and welcoming and celebrating the other brother. So many times when this story is read, I see that we identify, those of us who come and participate and are active in churches, we identify as that older son, right? And we get annoyed. Like we're putting in the work, we're doing all this. Why would someone else be welcomed into this relationship so easily? People who have turned their back. But the primary message of this is addressed to us, those older brothers who feel right and superior and offended. It is the older brother that is lost. He sees himself not as a son, but as a hand. He misunderstands his own place in his father's life, and so he is offended by the other son's newfound place in it. And the brother says to his father, "This son of yours." And the father reminds him, "No, this brother of yours is home." Frederick Buechner writes in Parables as Comedy that the elder brother is Pecksniff. He is Tartuffe. He is what Mark Twain called a good man in the worst sense of the word. He is a caricature of all that is joyless and petty and self-serving about all of us. The joke of it is that, of course, his father loves him even so, and has always loved him, and will always love him. Only the elder brother never noticed it because it was never love he was bucking for, but only his due. The fatted calf, the best scotch, the hoedown could have all been his too, any time he asked for them, except he never thought to ask for them, because he was too busy trying cheerlessly and religiously to earn them. So what does any of this have to do with saving? The Pharisees and legal experts, both of the sons, they all lack true security. They cannot make sure they have a good future because they haven't been saving in ways that matter. When we save so that we can make sure ministry can continue, relationships can grow, families can be secure. We save so that salvation can happen. Not just right now, but in the future too. God's kingdom has everything. And therefore, God can be wasteful in how the divine reaches out to us. But I think we all know that we do not have everything. We don't have unending resources. And therefore, we must be more frugal and responsible in the resources we have. As a congregation and as individuals, we must save some of our funds so we can make sure ministry and life continue on those not so good days. And so I challenge us, each of us, to look at our budgets, to put 10% for giving, 10% for investment, and 10% for saving, and look at that 70% and see if that is a number that we can live on. And what do we need to change to get there? It might not always be comfortable, but is it possible? Because this is a practical path to secure our futures. We hear these stories about the lost that God finds and offers great celebration for, so that we might know that we need to save and be secure enough so that when there are those who are lost, we can spend and celebrate with them. Not just as a church, not just as a community, but as individuals as well. And so next week, we will come together and commit our lives and our giving for the next year so the church can serve our community, help us grow in relationship with the divine and one another, and secure the future of ministry of First Christian Church. I pray that you prayerfully decide how you can give to make sure the gospel continues to be lived and spread through our congregation. And then come next week to dedicate your decision. We'll all come together as a unified body centered around Christ. Amen.